What happens when nature's power meets one of the most remote corners of America? How do you save entire communities when the sea rises, winds roar, and time runs out? This is the story of hundreds of Alaskans airlifted to safety as a powerful typhoon swept across the state, leaving behind flooded towns, broken roads, and incredible acts of courage. Stay with us till the end to see how hope still shines in the cold Alaskan air. And before we start, make sure to subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. In the vast, untamed wilderness of Alaska, life is a constant dance with the elements. But in September 2022, the rhythm of that dance was shattered by an intruder from the south. A storm of historic proportions, born from the remnants of Typhoon Merbok, churned its way across the Pacific Ocean, gathering unnatural strength from unusually warm waters. This was not the familiar winter gale Alaskans knew how to weather. This was a different kind of beast, a late-season cyclone carrying the fury of a tropical system into the frigid waters of the Bering Sea. As it barreled towards Alaska's western coastline, it unleashed a devastating combination of power that would test the limits of even the most seasoned residents. The storm's arrival was sudden and violent. Across a 1,000-mile stretch of coastline, from the Kuskokwim Delta to the Bering Strait, communities that had stood for generations were engulfed. In towns like Golovin, Hooper Bay, and Nutak, the ocean itself seemed to turn against the land. Wind gusts exceeded 90 miles per hour, peeling roofs from houses and snapping power poles like twigs. But the wind was only the beginning of the nightmare. A colossal storm surge, the highest in over half a century, propelled the sea inland. Waves, some cresting at over 50 feet offshore, crashed over seawalls and protective berms that had held for decades. Floodwaters, cold and merciless, surged through the streets, invading homes, clinics, and community halls. For these small isolated villages, many of them inhabited by indigenous peoples whose ancestors had lived on this land for millennia, the storm represented an existential threat, an assault on their very way of life. The fragile infrastructure that connected them to the outside world and to each other was being torn apart, hour by hour. As the tempest raged and the cold seawater rose with terrifying speed, a race against time began. With communication lines flickering and failing, and entire villages being swallowed by the flood, the call for help echoed across the state. The response was a massive, coordinated airlift, an extraordinary feat of logistics and bravery in the face of impossible conditions. The Alaska National Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, and a courageous fleet of local bush pilots mobilized, becoming the lifeline for hundreds of terrified residents. Helicopters battled through turbulent skies, their rotors slicing through the gale-force winds and blinding rain, searching for signs of life below. In communities where landing strips were submerged and roads had vanished beneath the waves, these aircraft were the only hope. Pilots, flying with exceptional skill and intimate knowledge of the treacherous terrain, performed daring landings on any patch of stable ground they could find. In one dramatic rescue, a National Guard Chinook helicopter hovered precariously over a flooded area, its crew winching families one by one from the rooftops of their submerged homes. Coast Guard Jayhawk helicopters, designed for maritime rescue, were redeployed to pluck people from the encroaching floodwaters, their crews working tirelessly through the day and into the fading light. It was a complex ballet of air power and human determination, with each successful evacuation representing a victory against the storm's relentless advance. From the very young to the elderly, hundreds of Alaskans were flown from the heart of the danger to the relative safety of higher ground, their lives hanging in the balance with every gust of wind. Even as the rescue missions were underway, the storm's destructive power was isolating entire communities, turning them into lonely islands amidst a sea of chaos. In the coastal town of Nome, the historic port city and finish line of the main road connecting it to neighboring communities was completely washed away, massive sections of pavement ripped up and tossed aside by the force of the waves. Power grids failed across the region, plunging towns into darkness just as the cold Arctic night began to fall. The loss of electricity meant more than just an absence of light. It meant the loss of heat, communication, and the ability to operate essential services like water pumps and sanitation systems. In response to the growing crisis, the spirit of Alaskan self-reliance shone through. With official help still hours or even days away for some, communities turned inward, transforming their public spaces into sanctuaries. Schools, churches, and tribal community centers, often the most robust buildings in these small villages, opened their doors to the displaced. In the town of Shaktoolik, residents faced a terrifying choice: evacuate or risk being completely inundated. After a harrowing airlift, those who remained took refuge in the school, watching from its windows as the ocean consumed the protective berm and crept ever closer. These impromptu shelters became hubs of warmth and solidarity. Volunteers organized makeshift kitchens, sharing what little food they had. They set up sleeping areas with blankets and coats, offering comfort to families who had lost everything. In the flickering light of lanterns and flashlights, neighbors shared stories, calmed frightened children, and collectively held their breath, waiting for the storm to pass. Amid the destruction and despair, incredible stories of human resilience began to emerge, testaments to the unyielding spirit of the Alaskan people. This was not a story of individuals waiting to be saved, but of a community rising to save itself. Neighbors with boats navigated the treacherous, debris-filled floodwaters to check on the elderly and stranded, pulling them from their homes and ferrying them to safety. In one village, a group of young men worked for hours in the freezing wind and rain, using their own heavy equipment to build a makeshift barrier to protect the local fuel tanks, preventing a catastrophic environmental disaster. These were not trained emergency responders. They were fishermen, hunters, and store owners, bound by a profound sense of duty to one another. This powerful sense of unity was the bedrock of the recovery. Long before government aid could arrive, Alaskans were already at work. As the floodwaters began to recede, they ventured out to assess the damage, not with despair, but with a quiet determination to rebuild. They salvaged what they could from their waterlogged homes, helped clear debris from their neighbors' yards, and shared tools, supplies, and labor without a second thought. The storm had washed away houses and roads, but it had also revealed the deep, unshakable foundations of community that define life in this rugged corner of the world. It was a raw, powerful display of the Alaskan ethos. When faced with adversity, you don't just look out for yourself, you look out for everyone. The survival of the individual is inextricably linked to the survival of the whole. In the days and weeks that followed the typhoon, the full scale of the devastation became heartbreakingly clear. The immediate focus shifted from rescue to recovery, a monumental task in a region where resources are scarce and logistics are a constant challenge. The top priority was restoring the essentials of life. Utility crews, many of whom had to be flown in, worked around the clock in challenging conditions to repair downed power lines and restore heat to freezing homes. Barges and cargo planes began to arrive, laden with desperately needed supplies: clean drinking water, food, fuel, medicine, and building materials. The government's response ramped up, with the state of Alaska and federal agencies like FEMA deploying personnel and resources to the affected areas. A major disaster declaration unlocked crucial funding to support the long, arduous process of rebuilding. For many families, the road to recovery would be long. Homes that had been passed down through generations were declared uninhabitable, their structures compromised by the force of the water and the pervasive threat of mold. The storm had not just damaged buildings. It had wiped out subsistence caches of fish and game, the food supplies that families depend on to get through the long, harsh winter. Rebuilding was not just about hammers and nails. It was about restoring a way of life. Support poured in from across Alaska and the nation, with charities and volunteer organizations joining the effort to help families get back on their feet. The government pledged support for long-term solutions, including potentially relocating entire villages, like Newtok, that are facing imminent threats from erosion and rising sea levels. The Great Alaskan Typhoon of 2022 was more than just a catastrophic weather event. It was a profound lesson and a stark warning for the future. The storm's unusual strength and trajectory highlighted the critical importance of robust early warning systems and comprehensive emergency preparedness plans, especially for remote communities. The successful evacuation of hundreds of people was a direct result of heeding those warnings and acting decisively. It underscored the need for well-rehearsed protocols and the invaluable role of local leaders in communicating risk and coordinating action. The event served as a real-world stress test for Alaska's emergency response infrastructure, revealing both its remarkable strengths and its logistical vulnerabilities. Perhaps most importantly, the storm brought the abstract concept of climate change into sharp, undeniable focus. For years, scientists have warned that the Arctic and subarctic regions are warming at a faster rate than the rest of the planet. The Pacific-fueled typhoon was a clear manifestation of these changing weather patterns. Warmer oceans are providing more fuel for storms, while diminishing sea ice leaves coastlines more exposed and vulnerable to erosion and storm surges. What was once considered a once-in-a-century storm may become a more frequent reality. For the people of western Alaska, the typhoon was not a political debate. It was a lived experience. It was the water in their living rooms, the wind tearing at their roofs, and the terrifying uncertainty of a future on the front lines of a changing planet. The lessons learned in its aftermath will be crucial, not just for Alaska, but for coastal communities all around the world. As the rescue helicopters cut through the stormy skies, every life saved became a symbol of Alaska's unshakable spirit. If you find these stories of courage and community inspiring, don't forget to subscribe and join our Stars and Stories family, where we uncover the moments that define America's strength.